All right, we are here with Erica Hill, who has had one of the top Keller Williams market centers in the entire country since the late 90s. Am I right about that, Erica?
I joined in 1999.
Yeah. And Boise, Idaho has been one of the standouts, top 5 market centers year in and year out. And one of my number one beliefs is that success by accident never repeats itself. And your success has stayed consistent, and you've grown that market center so incredibly. You have great leadership in place at that market center. And we chose you as a leadership role model, but I think there's so many things that we can talk about. We can talk about leadership, leverage, so many different subjects. But what I want our listeners to know is that you were at the very top of my list of people that I wanted to have a podcast with, because when I need a friend, when I need a sounding board, when I need someone who will really listen to me and process what I'm saying in a way that helps me process it better, you're the first person that I think of. And I have so much respect for you. I have so much gratitude for our friendship and how it's evolved over the years. And that's a whole nother story, right? And
Well, it's so mutual, Mark, and it is truly an honor to be a sounding board for you.
I love it, and I'm so grateful. So we're talking about leadership, and I'd like to just kind of start off with this question. What, like, when you think of the role of being a leader, where do you start on that? What is if you were to describe yourself as a leader, how would you describe yourself?
That's an interesting question. I'm probably going to bunny trail a little bit initially, and I think this might be more of a female issue than a male issue. I could be wrong on that, but I think I'm right. I think that we have a tendency, because of societal norms, to not necessarily believe in ourselves early on. And so as leaders, you kind of have to put your own insecurities sometimes aside. And for me, I spoke to this brilliant woman, one of my mentors at one point, who said, as I was telling her, as I was running a very successful business, and I was telling her, gosh, if people knew how flaky I really am, they'd probably run away. Right. And she said, well, what do other people think about you? What do they say about you? And she kind of snuck up on me with this. And I said, okay, well, they think I'm strong, and they think I'm smart, and they think I'm this. She said, well, I would challenge you to borrow their belief, because I think their vision of you is more true than your vision of you. Your vision of you is like looking into a carnival glass where your forehead is 4 feet long and your legs are 8 inches long, where other people's vision of you is more correct. And that was when I was pretty young, but it really changed my life. And since then, I've been able to step more fully into my own power and my own space and my own belief in myself as a leader. But I think that's an important message for a lot of people at any age in leadership, because we're human. So we can be out there and be very successful, but still have some underlying issues with, you wake up every day, you don't always feel like you're completely in power. You might have some insecurities. You might be a human, right? But I think leadership is really about values, and then really getting clear on who you are and what your values are, and stepping into that space.
First of all, I love that story, because I think everyone can relate to someone who saw the best in them and pulled that out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're absolutely right. Particularly those of us that are ambitious and high achievers, we have a healthy amount of self-criticism, right?
Oh boy, don't we?
And
yeah. I have a name for mine, but I won't mention it.
Okay. So I can tell you that what I think most leaders do is they try to bury that kind of critical view of themselves. They repress it. They
try to pretend it away.
They pretend it away. They just charge forward.
Yeah.
And they don't adopt a a better subconscious identity, and
Mhm.
and that runs their lives
Right.
in a way where I think, we all want the good. We all strive for and like crave the good of it all, and yet the bad tends to program us,
For sure.
and it's because we don't deal with it. So let's go to self leadership for a minute, because you brought that up, and you said you have to know who you are, you have to know
Mhm.
what your values are. Talk a little bit more about who you are and what your values are and how that shows up in your role as a leader.
Well, you've heard me talk about my 3 steps to a happy life, right? And that's the lens that I view life through. And so for me, it's really about, and you'll hear me use the word values a lot because it's been important, and I wish I had known about it decades before I really got clarity around it. But it's really about knowing truly what your values are so that you can use that as a lens to view the world, find other people whose values align with yours. And it's really that simple. And then once you get to that point, then you can build your tribe. And it needs to be both in your personal life and business. And so I think a lot of times earlier on, you're in business with people, and if you don't have that clarity, you're struggling with things that you don't necessarily understand. And a lot of those troubles aren't necessary, and they spring from just not having clarity around, who do I want to be in life with? Who do I want to be in business with? And that has to be determined by who you are. So once you know your values, then you can look for the people who align with you. And it's very simple. Beyond that point, it's just about mutual trust and respect. But you can't get there until you're really clear on your values and attract other people who have similar values. And in a healthy relationship, there's mutual trust and respect. And if you're missing one or both, you have something very dysfunctional. But in a healthy relationship, that's where it lands.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is that it all starts with self awareness.
It does. It really does. And that doesn't, I don't know about the rest of the world, but I didn't wake up with that one day. You have to work for that.
It's the hardest work I do. You
Yeah.
think about self awareness. What is self awareness? It's knowing who you are, it's
Mhm.
knowing what matters to you, it's knowing what's important to you, and what are the beliefs and the values that kind of guide you on that journey. And so
Mhm.
starting there, I think most people who go into leadership don't start there. I know that when I started in leadership, for me it was about being at the top. That was my view of it. And I love people so much, and I have such a heart for people, and I basically come from a servant leader mentality
Well,
to
that's why
begin
you and I
with.
are a thing.
Naturally, we both come from that place,
We
right?
do. Yeah.
And so I think that once we get clear about who we are, what I hear you saying is once we know who we are and what matters to us and what our values that guide us are, we can then serve others authentically, because we're coming from a pure motive, a good motive.
Well,
And
until then, you don't have that. To me, is step one, and there really isn't. There's no step two until you get past step one. So until you really know who you are, how in the world can you possibly know who else you need to add to your tribe?
that's right.
Right. So once you know who you are, then you know who you need to begin looking for to build your world with and through people who are going to, take whatever the hill is, whatever your hill is, they're going to take that hill with you. And when you haven't fully discovered that, you have a lot of problems in your business, I found. Until I had uncovered all of that, I look back now, and it's easy to look back, of course, and you look back at some of the struggles or the problems I might have had in business. And every time, without exception, it was one of two things. I was in business with a person whose values did not align with mine, right? And that was most common, or I'd hired out of pain, right? Well, it could be a third thing, communication, which we can get to later, but it's going to be one of those three things. Most often, it's just that you're in relationship with someone you shouldn't be in relationship with. That's the first thing I would check off on. If there's something going on, that's step one, right? And then step two is, if that's not the problem, well, maybe you have put the person in the wrong role, or you need better communication. But there's nothing beyond those three things at all.
Well, I know all leaders struggle with those three things.
Right.
It's about succeeding through other people. And what happens for me is I get attached to those people.
I know you do.
That's probably my Achilles heel of all Achilles heels is I get
Yeah.
attached to people, and then I sometimes defer the tough conversation about,
Yeah.
okay, our values are not aligning here. This is not
Yeah.
working. And then I'll get to the point where, oh, this is just so loud. I've got to turn the noise off.
Well, here's another thing you and I share in common, which is not a bad thing, but it, like all strengths, also can have a downside, right? We tend to be very trusting, and we tend to see the best in people. And so I don't think I would trade that given the choice. The downside of that is, again, if you don't have real clarity around your values and using that as a lens to assess other people, you wind up with takers. So wherever you find a giver, especially a big giver, you can almost inevitably look around them and you'll see takers.
Yeah.
So until you learn those lessons,
that's a big aha.
Yeah, you have to be acutely aware of those are strengths and weaknesses for us. The fact that we see the best in people and the fact that we tend to be trusting, and yet you have to build some boundaries and structure around that, knowing that that can mean you also allow in the wrong people.
Yeah. I think that what I hear you saying is that it's not just about hiring right, but that's where it starts.
For sure. Yeah. And if we don't do it right, it's because we haven't taken the time to really dive into this and get knowledgeable about who we are, what we need, and then the rest, if we haven't done that, really is our fault.
So you and I are alike in that we both see the best in others. We both trust other people.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, what that can cause at times is it causes me to not see them clearly. And
well,
so you're much better at this than I am.
Yeah.
Because you're a little more process oriented, or a lot more process oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still highly relationship oriented. How do you juggle that to really take an objective look at who someone is and get that? And where does that moment from clarity come from?
I almost think that at least for a long time, that for me tends to come from a place where I'm just very naturally very protective. And so when I care about someone, and I'll just use you as an example because you and I have known each other forever, I can look at you and look at the things that are going on around you. And I mean, it's just always easier to be objective from the outside, isn't it? And so I can look at the people around you and go, yep, you need to get rid of that one. And that's not an authentic friend. That one is trouble. And it's really easy, I think, for a lot of people. But for me, because I'm extremely protective, I tend to just look at that without even trying, just kind of walk through life that way.
That sounds like wisdom. That sounds like leadership wisdom.
And all of us have our gift zones. And so for some of us, we don't get them all, right? We each have our own. And for some of us, those things are going to be easy, where other things will be more difficult for me. For you, you have gift zones that are astonishing to me. I mean, seriously, I would trade you on several things. But I mean, we all have some things that come to us more easily than others. And then the idea is to build a board of directors, per se, around you that cover your blind spots, because none of us have it all, right? We just need each other. We need to build our team so that I'm really strong here, but I know I have these blind spots and I need you to fill those in for me, and I'll do the same for you.
Yeah. So let's now say that you've got your team assembled and you've got your org chart all set up, and now you're succeeding through other people. How do you approach that? It's not about what you do, it's about what they do and what you do together with them. And I think
a couple of things. One of the things that leaders have to be good at delegating. And if you don't begin to be good at delegating, well, then you have to learn how to become good at delegating. That's a trait of a leader. Obviously, if you're not good at delegating, who are you going to lead? The answer is no one. So
Yeah, if you can't delegate, then it's on you, right?
right. And then your team of one isn't going to go very far. But when I'm leading a team, the first thing I do, of course, again, for me, a lot of this is just easy. It's as easy as breathing. But because I'm future oriented, I tend to. So for me, I mean, some people live in the present, some people live in the future, and some people live in the past. I tend to live in the future, and so I'm usually a couple of years out, which compose its own problems, which I won't even go into. But since I tend to live in the future, I'm usually creating a vision because I'm seeing a vision, and I don't have any trouble inspiring the troops. Right? I easily able to convey a vision and inspire people to want to go with me to take where that hill is. But on the way, because I'm very, very naturally compassionate, it's very, very important to me. Once I've assessed that you're the right person and not the wrong person, I want to take care of you, right? So I want to make sure that as we're going to march toward this big goal, no matter how big it is, I want to know that you're getting your goals met in that process too. So it doesn't do me any good to focus on a goal and march toward a goal only to look and realize my team members aren't happy or they're not getting their needs met. So I'm very, very probably maybe to a fault even. I'm very aware of what the people on my team want, what they need. I care very deeply about who they are, and I want to know what their goals are. So I want to be absolutely 100% sure that when we hit our mutually agreed upon goal, we hit theirs too.
Okay, so we've talked about wealth determiners
Mm-hmm.
and that whole concept of you don't determine wealth for them, they determine wealth for you. So you focus on what they want and what matters to them, and you help them get that. And as they get that, they make sure you get what you want. And yet, intellectually, you can talk about that all you want, but unless emotionally,
Yeah.
that's who you are.
Yeah, I agree because I think for a lot of people, it's the marketing slogan. It's not real.
Right.
Say it, but they don't live it. And for me, you've visited my businesses and you've remarked on, gosh, the kids know your name, and I if I'm in relationship with you, I'm in relationship with you. I know who you are. I know who your kids are. I know what what your likes are, what your dreams are. I know what your pets are, and and I know what your goals are. And I want to make sure, because I feel very responsible that if you're in business with me, it's not to get me what I want. It's got to be mutual. So I need to get you what you want, or other. It has to be win-win. It's not a marketing slogan, and it's easy to achieve if you're focused on it.
So in the end, it's still right back to serving other people and
It really is. Yeah.
helping them get what they want, really helping them get clarity about what they want often.
Mm-hmm. It really is. Yeah.
And then
Yeah, it's simple if we let it be, isn't it?
yeah,
It's just
not
simple.
complex.
No, and that's the other thing I think I've learned about myself that makes my leadership style simple for me is that I do tend to laser focus on things for sure. But I have a tendency to not be able to see complexity, right? So somebody might look at something and think it's complex, and I can't see that. I literally cannot. So for me, the way that my mind and I process things is I'm solution based. So I break it down in simple bite-sized chunks without even knowing that I'm doing it. And so those are the two things that I think have enabled me to reach my goals and to help other people along the way. It's just like, let's stay laser focused, and it's not complicated unless you want it to be.
Yeah. What is the old saying that genius is taking the complex and making it simple so other people can do it and see it?
Yeah, I guess I know there's something like that out there. Yes, it makes perfect sense to me.
Right. Well, you do that naturally. So in hiring people, let's talk about selecting people and some of the traps in getting the right people on your team and seeing them clearly. Do you have
made all the mistakes? I can share all the mistakes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start there. What are the mistakes? What are the traps?
Okay. Well, and that's something that one of the questions you had asked me was, what would I have done differently? To avoid the mistakes, really studying people's behavior, which I know you have mastered at a high level. So behavioral assessments and becoming a student of people and their behavior is, to me, mandatory for any good leader, because until you really understand behavior and that combined with goals, but for the most part, different behavior styles, you can't possibly put someone in the right role for them. So here you go around either hiring out of pain as you get busy, or you have an opening in X part of your company and you hire somebody, put them in that, and it doesn't go well. Classic leadership 101 is it's their fault and they lose their job. In my world, that's my fault. It's a huge failure for me if it doesn't work out. And it really boils down to just really understanding behavioral styles, making sure that you're being very responsible and putting people in a role that puts them in their gift zone.
Yeah, it's the complexity is in paying too much attention to what they say.
Oh, yes.
And getting caught up in that story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of really looking for what they've done, why they did it, and how others felt about what they did.
And how they overcome adversity. That's a big one.
That's a huge one. Okay, so let's stay on mistakes.
Okay.
Do you have a personal story you want to share about like your journey in succeeding through other people and attracting and hiring the right people?
I'm not so sure it would be such a story, but I will share that early on, as I was trying to replace myself, and that was my job. Find someone who's better at this role than you are and move up and move on. When I was trying to replace myself, I would just, not understanding behavior well enough, hire out of pain. So I'm too busy. I want to go here and I'm stuck here until I find somebody to take this off my plate so I can go here. And I would hire somebody who, like you said, I'd listen to what they said. I'd hear what I wanted to hear. And then that's great. It's going to be great. You're hired. And then kind of like, one of our mentors had given me this analogy, which I thought was great. It's kind of like putting your kids together with a babysitter. That's terrible, right? Because you haven't done the homework. And so now I've placed all of my kids, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean, I've taken all the hundreds of people in my organization and put them under this person who doesn't like people, who maybe told me what I wanted to hear, but basically doesn't like people. And so now my kids are being treated terribly. And so that was one huge mistakes that I made. I had one very specific person that I had hired where I had put them in a leadership role, put them overseeing hundreds of my people, and they literally didn't like my kids.
That makes
it was awful.
And how do you balance, turning the business over to someone and putting them in a position of responsibility, and then knowing all your kids, so to speak,
yeah,
and juggling what you hear from the kids from personal agendas?
Yeah, well, that was an easy one in this particular case because I made such a terrible mistake that they were coming to me saying, listen, all of your top people are getting ready to leave and go to a competitor. You have to make this person go away. So that was an easy decision, but I had let it go on too long, wanting to believe what I wanted to believe, wanting to see the best in the person, wanting to support them, and support the decision I had made in hiring them. And then, of course, it became abundantly clear that I had made a terrible mistake. It was going to be a very visible exit, so that it was not something I had to give a lot of thought to. I just went and sat down with this person, and basically they said to me, well, you're the problem. You need to get out of the way. We can't have two people in leadership in this organization. And I said, well, I'll accept your resignation. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes it really clear, doesn't it?
Yeah, be gone.
Yeah.
Before someone drops a house on you.
It's a okay. So let's stay with this whole concept of having compassion, having empathy, really hearing the person that that is in your leadership role who you're succeeding through. Um, and also, as you juggle compassion and empathy, having like this hard driving need for results, that can sometimes conflict with compassion and empathy. How
I
do
think
you?
that's true, although I don't really find that to be a problem because it's back to learning about you, knowing what kind of coach you are. And once you determine that, figuring out what kind of player you need, right? So you've heard the story. We've all heard the story. We've learned it together. You know, the story about Terry Bradshaw and Joe, was it
Oh yeah,
Montana, right?
yeah, yeah.
Right. So the story with their different personality types and their coaches that suited fine, but if they traded coaches, no one would have ever heard from. So you really need to know what kind of coach you are, what player you need. And when you're in business with the people that you should be in business with, so I know I'm not ever going to minutia manage, as an example. If I have to look over my shoulder and wonder if you're doing your job, so I'm
Say,
very
say that
clear.
again. You kind of broke out for a second. You don't look up.
Oh, yeah, I said I am really clear that I don't minutia manage. So I know that there's a lot of different leadership styles. I know my style is that once you tell me you understand the job, you can ask me 15 times and say, I don't get it. Please explain it to me again. But once you tell me you understand, my piece is that I never want to look over my shoulder and wonder if it's getting done. If you tell me you've got it, I need to believe that and walk away. And if I ever have to look over my shoulder and find that it's not done, we're probably not going to stay in business. So knowing what kind of coach you are, knowing what kind of player you need. If somebody needs a lot of direction and they want a lot of hand holding and management, they're just not going to be a fit for me. But once you assess that and figure out the team that you need, and you have the team that you need, and then you're clear that you both want the same thing, that's key. Is not, you don't have to force it. Once you all decide that we're on the same team and we're wanting the same thing. Yeah, we're not in business and I'm not telling you what to do because you're not doing it because I'm telling you what to do. You're doing it because you and I want the exact same thing.
Yeah,
So I don't have to worry
that's,
about the compassion and I don't have to worry about the drive in those moments.
that alignment is everything. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had people ask me, what was it that made Keller Williams grow like it did, and how did you build this company as the CEO and the leader of the company up to the heights that it reached? And I said, well, number one, I didn't build it.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
built it together. And most importantly, there was this pretty long span of time where Gary, Mo, Mary, and I all wanted the same exact
Same
thing.
thing. Right.
That alignment
Right. It was
is
powerful.
so powerful.
We could
And
feel it in the company. We could all feel it. And the whole team beneath that level of leadership was the rest of us with the franchises that looked at you and bought into your vision. We all wanted the same thing too. And that was what caused that powerful momentum.
that's so important. And people miss this whole concept of alignment in leadership. You're not ever going to achieve anything significant without alignment. You may have a moment of success,
Right.
this brief moment in the spotlight, but it's not
Mm-mm.
sustainable
No,
with.
there's no replacement for that because if you have a team that's that passionate and that's what shows up as passion in those moments where we all want the same thing, we're clear on our mission, we're clear on our vision, and we all want the same thing. There's no stopping a team like that.
And I think that gets back to another one of my core beliefs about leading other people. And you use the kid analogy, and that is, we, as the leader of the organization, we have to create that clear map that tells the kids, okay, this is where we're going.
Right.
This is how we're going to get there.
Yeah.
This is how long it should take. And this is what you need to do while we're on this journey.
Right.
And when you bring it down to those terms, it's actually not complex at all.
No, it's not, because that goes back to creating the vision. And what I didn't say earlier, which is what you're saying really differently, is that you create the vision, but you also have the action steps. that you've agreed on. That's the roadmap to success. So you don't just say, well, here's the vision. Everybody gets excited and you run. No, you say, okay, we've all bought into this. Absolutely are all on board, all hands on deck. What are the action steps we need to take 1 through 10 to get there? And yeah, there have to be metrics and they have to be measured and checked off before you go to step number 2. And you cannot jump from 1 to 10 by skipping 2 through 9. That's something that I've learned the hard way. You have to have your steps and you have to actually have the discipline to not run past some pretty important steps on the way. You have to hit them all. You have to check them all off.
Follow that sequence.
Right.
I know that impatience for me is a huge blind spot.
I don't know that it's a blind spot. I think you share that in common with an awful lot of people. So I'm not going to ding you on that one. Impatience is probably how you get things done.
Well, for me, there's no question, but that's true because my low 3, meaning that impatient, needs diversity, wants variety, wants to be creative, wants to operate with this massive urgency. I mean, that's the profile of the impatient person, right?
Right.
And wants results.
Yeah.
And then you've got people who are not even in conscious competence sometimes. And we want to talk to them like they're in unconscious competence.
Well, what you just described to me is the macro of impatience. And then inside the organization, what can happen is the micro of impatience, so that you look down and you're dealing with a person. And because of our impatience, one of the things that might happen is we might ride herd over those people, right? Because we've already said, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going. And if we look down and someone doesn't seem to be moving along fast enough, that's also a pitfall for an impatient leader, is that we can be thought of as sort of rhinoceros that, ride herd over people sometimes.
Oh, yeah. I'd rather be a rhinoceros almost than an ostrich.
Oh, for sure. All day long. My daughter says, I'm a pink rhino with flowers. That's what she says.
Now I will say that I also believe that this comparison between the rhinoceros and the ostrich is that a lot of leaders will dig their heads in the sand and not pay attention.
Are they leaders?
So many do that. Or
are they actually leaders?
Wannabe leaders. Yeah.
Okay, so for me, that's sort of
tough stuff.
Well, I don't think that's a leader. That's my perspective, but I feel like that's almost a Martin Luther King moment, where I will butcher this, but you have heard that it's something to the effect of, in times of comfort and convenience, that's not going to show the measure of a man, right? It's in times of controversy. That's how you know who you are. That's how you know who a leader is. It's not during the comfortable times. Anyone can look good, but it's when the tough times come, when something shows up that's stressful, that's when you see what leaders are made of. That's my opinion. So as a leader, if nothing's going on, nothing's wrong, I'm not really going to show up in any particular way. People know who I am. They know what my agenda is. They know, what I expect. But it's when when the market tumbles, or when there's an economic shift, or when something goes wrong, when you're a leader, your people are going to look at you in a parental way, kind of like your kids would, and they're going to take their cues from you. And if you look nervous, that's how they're going to feel. And if you're a leader and you step up and you just pick up your sword and you are ready to go into whatever you need to go into, they're going to look at you and go, okay, we're ready too. So to me, that's a really important part of leadership, is really when it's stressful, when there is a problem, that's when it counts. The rest of it doesn't count.
Yeah. And I think that's also when, you got to look hard at, do your actions align with your intentions?
Yeah.
Because I always, as many times we've heard this, and as many times as others have heard me say this, the hardest person to lead is yourself. And the reason that is that we judge others by their actions. We judge ourselves by our intentions. And so we let ourselves off the hook. And yet, if we would start judging ourselves based on our actions.
That's So
and
powerful.
our intention,
Right.
I think we'd have an aha moment, like this epiphany, where we might see things for what they are.
Well, and those are blind spots. And that's why, again, we need to be surrounding ourselves with people who can point that out if we care. And I think, I know you do, and I know I do. If someone really cares about being a great leader and they know that that is a potential pitfall, then you're going to have somebody you trust beside you to point out when you need to course correct.
Yeah, that's so huge.
Well, and
And
otherwise, you'll see people whose
you
egos
have to
can
be
just
willing
run
to
amok.
you have to be willing to receive that message
Well,
without
that's what I was just saying too, is that otherwise what you're seeing is someone whose ego is just out of check. And that never ends well.
say that again. What?
I said that never ends well. When someone's ego is out of check, that's what you're describing. Is to me, it's when someone's ego is out of check because they don't have someone they trust nearby them to say, okay, you need to change your behavior. It's showing up like X, not going to be helpful to any of us. If you don't have that person by you, then your ego can very easily run rampant. And we see that all over the place. I mean, you've seen leaders like that. I see them. It never ends well.
I actually have a substitute word for ego, and that is pride.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I think when we're coming from pride, we're coming from a totally different energy than when we're coming from acceptance.
Acceptance and being servant based, losing and forgetting about being servant based, right?
And then as you get in that foxhole with the people you serve, you have to have a clear view of what the reality of the moment is.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that's one of the number one rules that I think a leader has, is to say, okay, this is where we are.
Right.
And based on where we are,
What do we
this
need
is
to
where
do?
we're going and what we need to do.
Right.
And I think a lot of leaders have an inaccurate view, or wannabe leaders have an inaccurate view of reality. And that's got to be the starting point in every situation, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about who some of your leadership role models are.
Oh my, I've had so many. I mean, one of the
MLK, I love MLK because, you know, it was love is stronger than hate.
Oh, absolutely. I could look at his quotes all day long. I mean, there are so many great ones. For me, it's always been about figuring out right from, a very young age, who knows more than I do. So I've had so many mentors and they've changed through the years because it was for me usually based on where I was in my trajectory and what I needed to learn to grow to my next level. So I've had a lot of mentors. I've had great mentors. I've had terrible experiences that taught me even more. So sometimes I think we can learn more from terrible leaders than we even can from great leaders, right? About what not to do.
Oh,
Because you can observe that and go, okay, well, that's a terrible idea. Let's not ever do that, right? I mean, again, I keep going back to that. It's almost parental in that you can look back and compare this to, we all know we learn from our parents. You learn either what to do or you learn what not to do. You're going to learn something. And it's the same with leaders. It's no different. You're going to look at them and you're going to see that's a great idea, or let's not adopt that. Let's not ever be that. So sometimes I feel like I've learned more about, it's been more important for me to learn from terrible leadership. I've learned a lot, but I've also learned from great people, and often they're in books. I've had great coaches, but sometimes when you run out of coaches because you feel like you've kind of gotten all you're going to get out of the relationship, you've learned what you can and you need to move along, that happens. And then sometimes it's just books, because sometimes I can't count on sitting with Warren Buffett, or I can't count on sitting with Leonardo da Vinci, or I can't count on sitting with John Adams, right? But I need these people because I know I can learn from them. So it's a lot of my mentors they don't know they're my mentors. Warren Buffett doesn't happen to know he's my boyfriend. My husband knows, but I have a lot of mentors.
Oh, I love that. So I really appreciate the context about learning from awful leaders. I mean, we've all experienced them, right?
We
And
all will.
we're all going to experience them again.
Yeah, with any luck, we'll experience fewer.
Well, I think the only thing I can do is figure out who I am
Yeah.
and be that person and
That is
learn
tricky,
along
Mark.
the way.
Maybe that's the biggest point we need to make here today is that when you're dealing with good people, bad people, anything in between, if you're really centered in who you are and you can stay centered, then no matter what's happening around you, you're okay. But if you allow yourself to be pulled off center by someone else's bad behavior, suddenly your life isn't feeling so good. So I think it's really important for us to just, as leaders and as people, get real clear and be able to stay centered in any storm. And then it gets a lot easier.
Yeah, I was talking with my wonderful Susan, who has supported me
Mm,
for so
yeah,
many years, and
yeah.
she always says chaos and urgency.
I love that.
Here he
Yeah,
is, chaos and urgency.
yeah.
I think that the reason I bring that up is that you mentioned staying centered. You can even stay centered
Yeah.
in chaos.
Oh, yeah. I agree completely.
In
I've
fact,
seen you
that's where I'm
evolve into that.
most centered. That's where I'm.
I've watched you. I think it was probably, I want to say about 7 years ago, where I started watching you make a very, very deliberate and visible shift where you used to be. I'm just going to pick on you for a second.
Go
You
ahead.
used to be a little bit reactionary.
Uh-huh.
You had a tendency to.
Still have it. Still have it, by the way.
But then I saw you really working on that, and I saw you really becoming more thoughtful and being more still in those moments and contemplative and making different decisions. I watched all of that unfold in you, and it's been a delight, actually.
I love
And I
that.
know it's been it's got to be liberating for you.
Well, it has been liberating. I've actually, my post KW years, I've referred to as my years in the wilderness.
Yeah,
The great thing about being in the wilderness, if you read Churchill, and I love Churchill,
I love Churchill.
is that it's in the wilderness where psychic dynamite is generated.
Oh, well,
It's
that makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
right. It's not when you're at the top of your game that
Mhm.
you're going to have that psychic dynamite. You might have momentum working in your favor, and yet you have to get away from that to regenerate it and recreate
And let
it.
me ask you, how hard is that transition?
That from the top into the wilderness, or from the
Peace
wilderness to psychic dynamite.
from the wilderness to psychic diamond, to be still in those moments where you feel like you're still in a hurricane, which is your own head,
Yeah,
right?
you're so right.
That transition is the hardest.
It's not easy.
And
None of
it's the biggest growth piece that any of us will experience if we choose to experience that.
Well, I think that in order for me to be doing what I'm doing today,
Mhm.
I had to experience that.
Right.
You know, I'm going to speak personally. For me, it's not about what I have to get out of anything. Never has been. It's about what I have to give and who I have to give it to, and being on that journey together. And you're the same way. Okay, you give, and we talked about this before, but people will take.
Mhm.
And I remember that give and take, was that Adam, what, I can't think of his last name, but the author who wrote the book Give and Take.
I know what you mean, but I can't, yeah, I can't
Yeah.
get out
How
get out
do
of my head.
like how do you deal with people taking
Well, I learned a very
you want to give?
valuable again, you learn more in hard times, right? What did we learn in easy times? Not much. And so for me, I learned a really valuable lesson that will serve me for the rest of my life during the Great Recession, because I'm a giver, you're a giver. We lead,
Yeah.
organizations with hundreds of thousands of people. And during that time, the market that we were in, the housing market, fell off a cliff. And so there were a lot of people who were struggling, and that's putting it mildly, right? They were losing their homes, they weren't able to keep their lights on, they weren't able to put food on the table. It was hard times.
Brutal. It was
It was
brutal.
brutal. So at that time, as a leader, I had a lot of people coming to me wanting help, which is, that I'm the leader. I'm supposed to usher my flock through these hard times. I take that seriously. And I was too inexperienced and naive to really understand what I know now. But I learned the lesson then, and that was people would come to me and they would say, I want, I need. And I was quick to write a check and jump in and help. And we would talk about what they needed to do. So an example would be someone would come to me and I'd say, all right, well, here's the plan. We're going to work on a 6-month plan. You're going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to write this check. And at the end of 6 months, because you're doing X, Y, and Z, you're going to be fine. We'll take your training wheels off and you'll be fine. And probably about 50% of the people, they just needed a leg up. So they just needed me to kind of to lean into my strength. Sometimes it was money, sometimes it was both. But if they would take the action steps we agreed on, they would be able to take their training wheels off and they would be fine. But there were equal number of people who would just come back to me and want another check, right? So I began to realize in that moment that there are people who really do just need a leg up. And there are just people who aren't going to do their piece and they're just going to keep taking. So you have to look at people as they come at you, and you have to decide, are they accountable? Again, are we aligned? Are they going to, just be takers, or do they just need my help? And so once you start separating the world into givers and takers, it becomes super easy. And if people come at me anymore, it doesn't take much for any of us to know. If you're just looking for that, looking at somebody and going, are they a giver or are they a taker? And that's for me, it's the only question I need to answer to know if I go to step 2 in the relationship. So if they're a giver, great, we go to the next step. And if they're not, we pass. And that is the lesson I learned by not making money for 2 years and writing a lot of checks during the recession. So I divide the world into givers and takers. If it's giver, we go on to the next step, which is do your words and actions match? And, we can have a lovely relationship and a life together. But if they're a taker, I'm not interested. They can just move off, and I wish them well.
What great context that is. I mean, I just wrote it down that when we hire people, we need to look for evidence of who they are, either a giver or a taker. And if it's a taker, we say next.
Absolutely. And it's easy to tell. If you just have that in the front of your mind to even look for it, it's very easy to find.
Giver or taker, and
Right.
do we want the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have the work ethic?
The responsibility, the accountability, so that your actions and your words match.
Yeah.
That's critical. And then that last piece is, if we get that far, then it's about mutual trust and respect, right?
Yeah.
But there, again, no
That's
steps
a
here.
beautiful thing. I mean, mutual trust and respect
Right.
is for me, that's a high vibe feeling. That then when you have that, it's not hard to have compassion and empathy, right? But to have compassion and empathy before you have mutual trust and respect.
Well, that's what we were struggling with early on. We were walking around being, compassionate and having empathy with people that we probably should never have been in a relationship with at all. And had we known just to use these gauges, giver or taker, do their action and their words match, we have mutual trust and respect, and then you have a very simple, happy life.
And there are no shortcuts to that process.
No. And working from home, I just want to point out that my yard guy is out there blowing leaves like a crazy person. Can you hear that?
Can't even hear it.
It does have this downside. So I'm glad you can't hear that.
Well, your new house looks beautiful. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I can't wait either. I think you should grab Bird maybe and fly on down.
It'd be fun.
Yeah, or Stacy, and we can figure all that out. But at any rate, if I had known a long time ago, it would have saved me a lot of pain just to know to divide the world into givers and takers. And then, that's real simple. You get rid of half the problems right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Erica, I probably needed this conversation more than anybody.
Well, that's because you're such a good guy and you're so trusting. I could imagine a lot of takers would just orbit in your direction very naturally. You ever struggle from this?
But then I have this like drive and this like frustration when things aren't moving quickly enough. And hopefully that exposes the takers eventually, because it's got to be about giving and contributing and making it better. Otherwise, you got to go.
Oh, absolutely. And then it's also that combined with job fit, the right fit, the job match. Do we have them in the right, role to match their gift zones? And if we've checked off on all of that and it's just not working out, then it's just not working out. One of the things I've been guilty of that I'm still working on, so I'm a recovering person here, is that I tend to wait too long. And this is one of the things that I learned from you early on and didn't take it to heart soon enough. You told me years ago that the first time you have the sense that you should not be in business with somebody, you should get out of business with them right then. And you were so right. That is so important. And
instead, I always followed my own advice.
Well, me too, because I knew you were right 100%. But my problem is that I try too hard. I try too long. And I stay in business with the wrong people for too long. That's one of the issues that I have struggled with in business. And I have corrected probably about 80% of that now. But I'm shooting for 100%. I'm going to keep chipping away at that because I know you're right. The first time you think you shouldn't be in business with a person, you're right. And you should get out of business with that person.
And I like to bring one new kind of point of distinction between first time you think. I think it's the first time you know. Do you think or do you know? Thinking can be knowing, but not always. And so you have to almost go, and by the way, that's a great story. I have a really dear friend who's, I think at the time, maybe 7-year-old son was spending the weekend with us, and it was kind of cold. And the hot tub was on. So, everybody got in the hot tub and it's 55 degrees outside and we get all hot. He says, okay, now let's get in the pool. And I said, I don't think I'm going to do that. I don't think I'm going to do that. He said, well, do you think or do you know?
Oh,
and that stayed with me.
That's great.
And
this is 7-year-old?
He was 7 years old. Yeah. So now when I think something, I go, did I think it or did I know it?
Oh, I love that. I love that. And here's one of the reasons why I love that.
So simple, right? It's so simple.
Well, here you go again, because when it's simple, it's just, it makes a huge difference. One of the reasons I know that for sure is so important is because if I look back at the mistakes that I feel like I've made, there's not one exception. Every time I made a mistake in business, I was not listening to my inner voice.
Oh, yeah.
What I know, right? The things that you know. And so I overrode that with logic, right? Because that's easy to find and that's easy to do. And so without exception, any mistake I made, I can look back and go, I didn't listen to what I know to be true. I overrode it with logic and continued down a wrong path.
That for me is maybe the best message of the podcast is that I know I'm highly intuitive. I know for a fact you're like witchy intuitive. And
I've been accused of being a witch sometimes in a good way.
I mean it in the best way possible.
I know.
And yet that inner voice can get hushed. And when we hush it never, for me personally, I'll just say, doesn't serve me all that well.
No. And that is a trap. It's an easy trap, especially for me because I'm highly logical. And I just took another behavioral assessment that I'd love to send to you called the Culture Index. I'd love to send. You will
I
love
know
it.
about. Send it to me. Send it to
Okay.
me.
Because it's kind of like the ABA, but it's the, next fifth iteration of that. You're going to love this. But what I discovered, which I also wish I'd known 1,000 years ago, would have been helpful, is that I'm so logical that I think in black and white and I can't see gray, which is, can, again, be a really good thing. It can also be a bad thing because you can override your intuition with logic.
Yeah,
Terrible idea.
intuition is gray matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
That intuition is almost like gray matter.
You're right.
And yet, when you succeed, gray doesn't get you there.
Right. That's true.
It's commitment.
Yeah.
It is a fierce drive.
Yes.
To go tackle the world and get what you know is possible. And so,
and here's another point in our conversation. This is another point in our conversation where I'm realizing another reason why it's critical to surround yourself with your own personal board of directors, because in those moments when you're charging ahead and you're in black and white mode, because that's how shit gets done, right? You need somebody around you to help point out the things that you might be missing.
okay, you're officially on my board of directors.
I want to be on your board of directors. I have fun whenever I'm looking at whatever I'm looking at with you. It's just pure fun.
I love that so much. I've had so much fun in this conversation. First of all, just reconnecting with one of my favorite people and one of my role models and go-to people is just, you have like infused me with energy and joy and happiness and gratitude at such a high level. And Erica, I got to tell you, I love you. I love you.
Love you, Mark. You're like a brother to me. You and I have this connection that's undeniable and it's indescribable, and yet it's there. I will always be there for you 100%. And I know you'll always be there for me. Let's just keep covering each other's blind spots and do it more intentionally.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this time. And I'm going to be reaching out to you real soon. And
It was a joy.
We'll get something going.
All right. I'm going to count on that. I'll chase you down.
I love that.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Mwah.